The two U.S. vice presidential candidates take to the debate stage. Plus, President Trump pulls out of the next presidential debate. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Compared to last week's presidential debate filled with interruptions, Wednesday's encounter between Vice President Mike Pence and the challenger, Senator Kamala Harris, was relatively civil. Then earlier today, shortly after debate organizers announced the next presidential debate would now be virtual, President Trump said he would no longer participate. For more, we turn now to CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King. So Nathan, let's begin with that debate announcement. It's now a virtual town hall, a change needed according to organizers to protect the health and safety for all of the people involved. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, after the debate, we have a debate about the next debate. I mean, excuse the pun, but I would love to be a fly on the wall in these negotiations, because obviously the Commission on Presidential Debates had a decision to make because they don't quite know whether US President Trump will be A, well enough, or still shedding the virus potentially, because we don't have that much information on his recovery except positive spin that we've heard from the White House physician and White House staff. So they made the decision to hold it remotely, which the Biden campaign said was fine. But then the US president went on his favorite favorite TV network, Fox, on the Business Channel, and said, look, I'm not accepting this. And this is sort of back and forth about potentially delaying it till October the 22nd, but you know, so that the president could have many more negative COVID tests. But essentially, Joe Biden campaign said, no, we're happy to have it remotely, and he's now in the position where he's going to actually hold a town hall event with the ABC News network without President Trump, but with a studio audience asking questions. Listen, this is negotiation out in the public. I expect things to change. Why? Well, the US president, if you look at the polling, and let's face it, polling's not always trustworthy, but 16 points down, 14 points down, the latest two polls, you'd want to get on TV and debate, wouldn't you? So we'll wait and see what happens. The problem, of course, for the US president from the first debate is that if it's remote, someone else will have control of the mute button.
Nathan, one other thing, let's talk about the vice presidential debate that took place on Wednesday. The pandemic was among a number of issues that were discussed. What are you hearing? How did the candidates do?
Well, I mean, it was a debate, wasn't it? Did you? I watched it, and it was like, oh, there's some issues being discussed here. It was fresh. You didn't feel depressed. It was actually pretty good. I mean, you know, Vice President Mike Pence did interrupt both the moderator, Susan Page from USA Today, and Kamala Harris. But, you know, both made remarks that could definitely be fact-checked as being false. And Kamala Harris really sort of pushed back sometimes and said, I'm speaking. Can I finish speaking? It was very interesting for those people who understand what mansplaining is. And so that was very interesting. But what I thought was really interesting is that COVID and COVID-19, the president's response, the plans for the future, the current state the US is in, remain center stage, even when they were talking about other things. Let's look at this exchange.
Can you imagine if you knew on January 28th, as opposed to March 13th, what they knew, what you might have done to prepare? They knew and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said, you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't. And in spite of all of that, today they still don't have a plan.
From the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first. Before, there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned from China. President Donald Trump did what no other American president had ever done, and that was he suspended all travel from China.
Now, of course, you can fact check both those statements. Of course, suspending all travel from China was not actually necessarily true. We've been through these debates, but what's really interesting for me is that despite the president's best efforts since his triumphant return to the White House here at the shoulder behind me, we're outside the White House because of health concerns at the moment, is that he's trying to put COVID behind him still, trying to inject himself into the tenuous negotiations over stimulus, trying to push forward the vacancy in the Supreme Court to get that filled by Election Day. But COVID still won't disappear, either physically within the United States and himself personally, but also in terms of his political fortunes. So no matter what happens in the next few weeks, COVID-19, the Trump administration's response, what will happen if a Biden government comes in, will be center stage, despite the fact that Vice President Pence and the US President are trying to change the subject as many times as they can.
Thanks, Nathan. That's CGTN's Nathan King reporting. Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Jadan Horyn is in New York. He's a writer and conservative commentator. Mary C. Curtis joins us from Charlotte, North Carolina. She's a columnist for Roll Call and host of the Equal Time podcast. With us from Chevy Chase, Maryland, is Democratic strategist Joel Rubin. And from New York, Amy Holmes is a writer for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and a columnist for the Swiss weekly Die Weltwoche. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And Amy, let me start with you, and let me start with that decision taken by President Trump not to take part in the next presidential debate because it's going to be a virtual debate. Is that a smart move on the part of the president? Because, as Nathan just pointed out to us just now, he's trailing in the polls, and in some instances, trailing by double digits in key states.
Yes, even Rasmussen Reports, which is generally the most favorable poll to the president, has Biden up 12 points. Donald Trump, he's in a very deep hole and he needs to climb out. You're asking if his decision to reject the commission's idea of this virtual debate was a good one. Well, there's the substance and then there's, of course, the strategy. The substance, I think it was reasonable for the president to say, hey, wait a minute. They didn't consult with the president. He says he found out about it at the same time that we all did. And a lot of people would, normally have concerns if their debating partner has any advantages, if he has notes, if he has staffers in the wings that are helping, a teleprompter. Those are all reasonable concerns. But when it comes to strategy, Donald Trump, he needs a second swing at bat. That first debate was a debacle for him. His polling has been spiraling down ever since. He needs this debate far more than Biden does. Biden could just, go home, stay in his basement, and write it out till November 3rd. Donald Trump needs that audience. He says that he would do a rally instead. Well, those rallies do attract lots and lots of people, oftentimes thousands screaming fans, but they don't attract 73 million people watching for 90 minutes.
Joel, do you think this might be, as Nathan pointed out to us, a negotiating tactic on the part of Donald Trump, trying to get what he wants?
Well, Anand, I really do agree with Amy on this one. This is a missed opportunity. So if he's negotiating, I'm not sure who his negotiating partner is. He doesn't have a position on this that is going to really galvanize many to his side, clearly. And think about the context. We as Americans, we have been living in our homes for the last 6-7 months using Zoom, using online tools to engage our colleagues and speak with our friends. So it's very normal for us. So it's a bit of an offensive thing for the president to say he won't do that. He won't be in a virtual debate, just as we all here tonight are in different locations virtually, but speaking with each other. So I don't see how the president gains much out of this. He does not have an upper hand on negotiations. He needs the debate much more than the debate needs him.
Jadan Horyn, if President Trump decides not to go ahead with this debate, isn't that a gift really to Joe Biden? Because many analysts, many commentators, the conventional wisdom tells us that he's not as strong as Donald Trump in a debate situation. That's what we've been told. So wouldn't this really be giving in to Joe Biden?
This is the central irony. We had a Joe Biden that appeared to be afraid to leave the basement for months, and the Trump campaign goading the Biden campaign repeatedly over his inability to campaign and his unwillingness to leave the basement, and then prepping for that debate, saying that they were going to clean the floor with him. And instead, the president, I think, overdid it. And the result now is, of course, that the media is licking its chops and the campaigns are licking their chops for another debate, or at least the Biden campaign is. And of course, the Trump campaign is doing what the Biden campaign was doing before, which was looking to really not participate. So I think for the president, though, he knows that making himself the center part of the news cycle is essential. And most of the media coverage from last night's very consequential vice presidential debate, because both of these candidates will be the oldest president in the history of our nation, and both of those vice presidents will likely at some point have to take on the powers of the presidency. He knows that he needs to change the narrative, and if the narrative is about him, again, then it's on the top of voters' minds. So once again, this is President Trump, the master of publicity, as opposed to President Trump, the master political strategist looking for votes.
Mary C. Curtis, what are your thoughts on the president's idea to stay away from that debate? He is polling badly. Wouldn't this debate give him the opportunity, as we've heard, to stem the bleeding somewhat?
I do agree. He needs to get in front of the American people. He needs to debate after that last impression. I do think, though, we were talking about the vice presidential debate, and then we wake up, and as your previous guest said, he's at the top of the news cycle, and he sees that. And this next debate was going to be a town hall, which is the Joe Biden's strength. But it would have given the president a chance to connect one-on-one with the American people, and that is truly a missed opportunity. And now we do have the image of him in the White House, and you can see why people would be skeptical wanting to debate in person, because we don't know when his last negative test is or when his positive test was. He is a president fighting coronavirus. He likes to appear very strong. And this puts him in a weakened state. And that had been a chance for him to basically say, I've been chastened, I've had this illness, take it seriously. And instead, he's saying it was a gift from God, and we have all these medications that other people really wouldn't have been able to afford. So yes, he definitely needs to get in front of the American people. And there have been precedents for it, even before illness. I believe one of the Kennedy-Nixon debates, they were in different studios on different coasts, and the moderator was somewhere else. So it does seem like a very reasonable request.
Amy, let's get to Wednesday night's debate, the vice presidential debate. It was historic in many ways. This was the first time we had an African-American vice presidential candidate on stage. What did you make of the debate?
I thought it was reassuringly boring. It was the traditional politician debate that we, have watched for years, that Donald Trump blew apart as this insurgent candidate in 2016, and then, of course, as president just a week ago with Joe Biden. And I thought it was interesting that neither of them, they didn't take cheap shots. When the issue of China came up, for example, Vice President Pence, he didn't mention Hunter Biden, and I'm not mentioning that to mention Hunter, but just as to point that out as an example. And Kamala Harris, her language was very reassuring. I noticed that she didn't use any postmodern, intersectional mumbo jumbo academic talk that is so common in, on the left and in left-wing reporting. She didn't introduce herself as I identify as her or anything like that, which has happened in previous Democratic debates and encounters. I think both of the candidates served the top of their tickets well going in. Their number one task was to do no harm. And I don't think either did harm to their tickets. Now, I will say that I missed, however, those zingers. I mean, Kamala Harris, her brand is sticking in the knife and twisting it and getting a big headline and a news cycle the next day. I think she pulled her punches, and what we got was 90 minutes that I don't think people will remember 48 hours from now.
Joel, it was a very low-key affair, wasn't it? Very respectful. Neither of the candidates really lost their cool. It seemed in many ways very rehearsed as well. we add to that, of course, the fact that neither of the two candidates really answered the questions that were put to them. As a Democratic strategist, what did this achieve?
Well, I was going to say the most enjoyable moment of the debate was the fly landing on Vice President Pence's head, which certainly is what got a lot of attention for folks. And that may be what people remember from the debate. I think for Kamala Harris, really, this was an opportunity to reassure people, but also to mobilize the base. And there were points there that she was making that were very invigorating to base Democratic voters. And for Mike Pence, he needed to do better. He needed to stop the bleeding that Donald Trump is experiencing right now in his campaign. He did that 4 years ago in the debate against Tim Kaine and really excelled 4 years ago. Not yesterday. Yesterday, he kind of was status quo. And I think we saw the strain of working as vice president for Donald Trump, which is that Donald Trump says a lot of things that are very hard to defend. And it was very difficult for Mike Pence because he did not want to contradict Trump. So overall, a net plus for Kamala Harris, for Democrats. Right now, we're all about mobilizing our voters. Persuasion is very much at a minimal focus. And what she did last night will help mobilize voters.
Joel, just one point on what you said there right at the end. Did the debate really shift voters? I mean, so there may be some people who are still undecided. That's hard to believe right now. But do you think it pushed voters in one or other direction?
I don't think it pushed people away from the Biden-Harris ticket. And I think the key thing for Democrats right now is we are very nervous about the actual process of the vote counting, in that there's a suspicion that President Trump is trying to slow down and block the ability of Americans to have their votes counted. So our viewpoint is to turn out as many voters and get them out there and get them to the polls now, or mail-in voting now, and have an overwhelming victory so that it cannot be contested by Donald Trump, as he seems to want to do in the courts. And so in that count, Kamala Harris did very well at getting people feeling invigorated about this ticket.
But if I could interject,
Yeah.
to point, vice presidential debates and vice presidential candidates don't make a difference on election day. This has been studied. When people go to the poll, they're voting for the top of the ticket. It's either Biden or Trump. Kamala Harris, Mike Pence, their job is to be an advocate, a surrogate for the top of the ticket. But traditionally, generally, they don't change anything, which is why you don't want to do anything that could get the top of the ticket in trouble. And I think last night, both of the candidates achieved that.
But there
Amy,
is an historic message with Kamala, and she was very clear in making some critical points during the debate that do activate core Democratic constituencies, even though I agree with Amy, VPs overall are not the primary motivation for voters.
Right, Amy, that point that you make, that the vice presidential debates don't really move things, although this particular debate was seen as having more consequence because of the ages of the candidates at their respective in their respective campaigns.
Well, there's that, and I think both candidates would have been reassuring on that score, but there was pushback. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when she heard that Kamala Harris is saying, we're not banning fracking, and the Green New Deal really isn't the basis of the Biden-Harris plan. AOC, she didn't like hearing that.
Yeah.
She thought that was a betrayal. And you saw that Senator Harris, she was very careful not to answer the question about packing the Supreme Court, because she knows that if she says, no, we will not do that, that could hurt the left. And if she says, yes, we will, that's going to be very alienating to mainstream suburban, Midwestern, middle American voters.
All right, I want to get to that issue of the Supreme Court a little bit later. But Jadan Horyn, you have Mike Pence right now. He is the current vice president. I would contend that he had the harder job last night. He had to defend President Trump's position. And we know from polling that's been carried out over the last few months that President Trump's approval rating, especially when it comes to his handling of the pandemic, has been very, very low. So insofar as defending that record, did he succeed?
Categorically. I think the role that Pence had last night was to reassure traditional Republicans that the Trump-Pence administration still has those values at its core. And he did that. And so to Joel's point about mobilization, there was a tacit understanding that they need to mobilize, which is what has eroded, a traditional Republican core, which is suburban voters, specifically suburban women. And I will make one point that the history-making candidacy of Kamala Harris is betrayed by her own record when it relates to criminal justice. And I think for many African Americans to think that just because someone represents or looks like them will hold their values at their core, I think is a miscalculation of the Biden campaign. And I have thought that since Harris was chosen as a ticket mate. And I do believe that that is why some polling reflects, at least in minority communities, that there is an openness to the Trump administration and the Trump campaign, which is why, again, the purpose of last night's debate and why it is so consequential, and I will disagree with Amy on this, if in January President Biden contracts at inauguration coronavirus at 70-some years old, he may pass. So that could be the presidency of Kamala Harris. Likewise, we have no idea what's going to happen to President Trump with his illness, and it could take a turn for the worse. So again, that could be a President Trump. And so I think voters were looking last night and saying, these two individuals could be our president. Did they do the job?
Joel Rubin, I just want to get to that point that Jadan raised about Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor, as Attorney General in California. It's been pointed out very often that that's one of the weak points of this ticket, of the Biden-Harris ticket. What do you say?
Well, and I'd like to say something too as well.
Yeah, I will get to you, Mary.
Yeah, I'll be very brief then, please. Just very, very short. There's a lot of schizophrenia about Kamala Harris. On the one hand, she's the most liberal senator in the United States Senate, according to President Trump, and she's a monster. And on the other hand, she's a closet conservative prosecutor. I think the truth of the matter is that she's extremely popular amongst African-American voters. Certainly, there are opportunities for President Trump to make inroads, and he's been trying, but she's doing quite well, and Democrats have a very strong case against President Trump in the ethnic minority communities, in the Black community, and in communities like Jewish community, where we're very concerned about the language coming from the White House.
Okay, Mary.
I would like to just briefly on that particular point about criminal justice. Vice President Pence tried to have it both ways when he attacked that, but at the same time denied there was any systemic racism or any problems with law enforcement. And she fought back on that. They talked about the Breonna Taylor case. So in that case, he seemed very conservative. And then you have the news coming out that could change it. We find out that there are white supremacists and vigilante groups that are planning a coup and to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. And at the same time, you have the president seeming to coddle white supremacist groups, telling the Proud Boys to stand by, and then Vice President Pence coming on and backing him in that way and saying, well, he didn't really say that, and we do support law enforcement, and there's just there's no problems with systemic racism. So I really don't think they can make inroads in the minority communities on this particular point. And also, I do think, as you were mentioning in the report earlier, he was interrupting her quite a bit, and the moderator as well. So women and women of color have seen that kind of behavior, and they need the Trump team needs inroads with women.
Mary, I want to stay with you for one of the other big issues, one of the other big hot button issues for Democrats, and that is a question that Kamala Harris was asked yesterday, and we talked about this a moment ago, about the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, whether the Democrats under Joe Biden would pack the court, meaning would they expand the number of justices in the court to get some kind of an advantage there. Here's part of the debate here. Here's Mike Pence on that.
So I think the American people would really like to know, if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States, are you and Joe Biden, if somehow you win this election, going to pack the Supreme Court to get your way?
In 1864.
Well, I'd like you to answer the question.
No, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. Okay. The American people are voting right now, and it should be their decision about who will serve on this most important body for a lifetime.
So, Mary, we didn't get a direct answer there, but don't voters need to know the intentions of Joe Biden should he become president as far as what's going to happen with the Supreme Court?
Well, it's kind of interesting because he was very smooth at pivoting. He pivoted from a question on what the Trump administration would do to protect people with pre-existing conditions since they're fighting in the Supreme Court to end them, and he pivoted to the Supreme Court and but I do think they probably are going to come up with an answer about that, but they would say, I'm sure it's a hypothetical. They would have to win the presidency and win the Senate. And they really don't want to have a definitive answer on that. They will probably pivot back to the fact that they are trying to push this when an election is going on. Particularly, it's very different from in 2016 when President Obama, nominated Merrick Garland. And it was interesting because Pence did not answer the question if he would be committed to a peaceful transfer of power, which I think people really were very worried about. And he just started repeating things about mail-in votes. So both of them were kind of fudging on different things, on different questions. But that was a question from him and not the moderator.
Right.
All campaigns are hypothetical. That's the entire point, which is voters, if you vote for me, these things will happen. This is how I will run the country. So a question like whether or not you would advocate and push to pack the Supreme Court it should be answered. It's absolutely essential to the functioning of our country and our democracy. We know the political reasons, the strategic reasons, why they're sliding away from it, but that doesn't make it principled or responsible.
But the peaceful transfer of power is not a policy issue. It's a core bedrock of our Constitution and of our country and of our tradition. So that I think but
one moment, Amy, I'll get to you. Joel, finish what you were saying.
Well, no, I mean, I think the analogy is not directly tied. It's not equivalent. Peaceful transfer of power should not even have to be a question. The fact that President Trump repeatedly and now Vice President Pence do not want to answer that should be shocking and concerning. Regarding policy issues, though, yes, we want to get closer and closer to real answers. But I do agree with Mary that this is not the kind of thing as a hypothetical, that it's not a policy position that a future president should have. That's a whole other set of issues.
Okay, Amy, very quickly, I've got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think that President Trump should be clear and be definitive on that question of a peaceful transfer of power, but to sort of brush aside the idea of expanding the Supreme Court so that it has liberal justice control for decades. That's not a small matter. That's a huge matter. Another matter that I think needs to be asked and answered is the filibuster in the United States Senate. We know that the filibuster is a tool for forging bipartisan consensus to get those 60 votes. If it's changed to 51, again, we're just going to have a runaway train.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Time has caught up with us. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.